The interstellar luxury liner, Celestial Voyager, glided silently through the vast expanse of space. Its sleek silver hull shimmered faintly under the distant light of the sun as it carried its passengers from Earth to Mars. Inside, the first-class cabin was a marvel of modern engineering and design. Soft ambient lighting bathed the room in warm hues, while holographic displays projected serene images of galaxies and nebulae onto the walls. Plush leather seats reclined at perfect angles, offering unparalleled comfort. For those fortunate enough to afford such extravagance, this journey wasn't just about reaching their destination, it was an experience. Gabrielle Union sat quietly near one of the large observation windows, her gaze fixed on the swirling stars outside. She had always been captivated by space, ever since she was a child watching documentaries about astronauts and distant planets. Now, here she was, traveling aboard one of the most advanced ships humanity had ever built. It felt surreal. Her presence on board wasn't unusual. Gabrielle was a well-known actress who had starred in several blockbuster films over the years. But today she wasn't dressed for the cameras or red carpets. Instead, she wore a simple yet elegant navy blue jumpsuit paired with comfortable sneakers. Her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. She flipped open her tablet, scrolling through the digital pages of a novel she had started reading days ago. Despite the luxurious surroundings, Gabrielle preferred solitude during long journeys like these. The hum of engines and occasional soft chatter of fellow passengers created a soothing backdrop that allowed her mind to wander freely. Occasionally, someone would glance in her direction, perhaps recognizing her face from movie posters or interviews. But no one approached her, not yet anyway. A few rows away, another passenger caught Gabrielle's attention without even trying. Big Shaq, the former athlete turned diplomat, lounged comfortably in his seat, sipping on a glass of sparkling water infused with citrus. Known for his towering height and infectious laughter, he stood out wherever he went. His broad shoulders filled the chair effortlessly, and his casual attire, a fitted gray hoodie and dark jeans, contrasted sharply with the opulence around him. Unlike Gabrielle, Big Shaq seemed more at ease mingling with others. He exchanged pleasantries with the flight attendants and cracked jokes with nearby travelers, drawing smiles and chuckles wherever he went. But not everyone on board shared the same warmth. Sitting diagonally across from Gabrielle, Victoria Langley adjusted her designer sunglasses, unnecessary indoors but necessary apparently for maintaining her image. Dressed in an ostentatious gold and white ensemble that screamed wealth, Victoria radiated arrogance. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair framed her sharp features, and every movement she made appeared calculated to draw attention. She clutched a designer handbag worth more than most people's annual salaries, occasionally checking its contents as though expecting something vital to appear. Victoria wasn't alone in her disdain for subtlety. Accompanying her were two assistants, both visibly younger and far less confident. They hovered nearby, ready to fetch anything she might need, though she rarely acknowledged their existence beyond curt commands. One assistant held a tray containing various snacks, while the other balanced a small stack of magazines and tablets. Neither dared speak unless spoken to, their eyes darting nervously whenever Victoria shifted in her seat. For the first hour of the flight, things remained relatively calm. Passengers settled into their routines, reading, napping, or simply gazing out the window at the endless void of space. Gabrielle immersed herself deeper into her book, letting the fictional world take her far away from reality. Big Shaq continued chatting amiably with those around him, his booming voice occasionally breaking the monotony of the cabin's atmosphere. And Victoria? Well, Victoria busied herself inspecting her reflection in a compact mirror, adjusting her lipstick with meticulous precision. Then came the moment when everything changed. It began innocuously enough. Victoria glanced up from her mirror, scanning the cabin lazily until her eyes landed on Gabrielle. At first, there was nothing unusual about her expression, just mild curiosity. But then, something shifted. Perhaps it was jealousy sparked by Gabrielle's effortless elegance. Or maybe it was sheer boredom driving her to stir trouble. Whatever the reason, Victoria's lips curled into a faint smirk before she leaned back in her seat, crossing her legs deliberately. "Excuse me," Victoria said loudly, her voice dripping with condescension. "Are you famous?" Her question hung in the air, piercing the tranquil ambiance of the cabin. Several heads turned toward Gabrielle, curious about how she would respond. Gabrielle looked up from her tablet, momentarily startled. When she realized the question was directed at her, she offered a polite smile. "Yes," she replied calmly. "I'm Gabrielle Union." If Gabrielle expected any acknowledgement of her name, or even basic courtesy, she was sorely mistaken. Victoria tilted her head slightly, feigning confusion. "Oh, right, you're, what, an actress? Singer? Something like that?" Gabrielle nodded, still smiling despite the thinly veiled insult. "An actress, yes." Victoria let out a theatrical sigh, shaking her head as if disappointed. "Well, isn't that quaint?" she remarked, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "You know, I've always thought celebrities should leave the finer things in life to those who truly deserve them, like premium seating on spaceships, for instance." A ripple of discomfort spread through the cabin. Some passengers shifted awkwardly in their seats, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Others pretended not to notice, burying themselves deeper into their books or devices. Gabrielle, however, remained composed. She set her tablet aside and met Victoria's gaze directly. "I assure you," Gabrielle said evenly, "I earned my spot here just like everyone else." Victoria raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Earned it? Oh, darling, please. Don't insult my intelligence. We all know how these things work. Someone probably gifted you this ticket because they felt sorry for you." Her words struck a nerve, not just with Gabrielle but with many others in the cabin. A few gasps escaped nearby passengers, followed by murmurs of disapproval. Even the flight attendants paused mid-step, exchanging uneasy glances. Yet Gabrielle didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "You're entitled to your opinion," Gabrielle said softly, picking up her tablet again. "But I hope you'll remember that kindness costs nothing," Victoria scoffed, leaning forward slightly. "Kindness? Sweetheart, we're talking about class, not charity. And frankly, I don't see much of either coming from you." At this point, the tension in the cabin became palpable. Passengers exchanged worried looks, wondering if the situation would escalate further. Gabrielle, however, chose to ignore Victoria entirely, focusing instead on her book. She flipped the page deliberately, signaling that the conversation was over, at least as far as she was concerned. Big Shaq, who had been observing the exchange from afar, narrowed his eyes. He recognized the signs of bullying when he saw them, and Victoria's behavior left a bitter taste in his mouth. Still, he bided his time, waiting to see how things unfolded. Little did anyone know his patience wouldn't last much longer. Meanwhile, Victoria basked in the attention she had garnered, oblivious to the growing resentment around her. She smirked triumphantly, convinced she had won some invisible battle. But unbeknownst to her, the real drama was only just beginning. As the celestial voyager continued its journey through the cosmos, the seeds of conflict had been planted. What started as a peaceful voyage was quickly turning into something far more unpredictable and unforgettable. The first-class cabin of the celestial voyager was no longer the serene sanctuary it had been just moments ago. Victoria Langley's sharp words lingered in the air like an unwelcome guest, casting a shadow over the luxurious surroundings. Gabrielle Union sat quietly in her seat, her posture stiff but composed, as if determined to rise above the situation. She flipped another page of her tablet, pretending to read, though her mind was far from the story on the screen. The weight of Victoria's insults pressed down on her, not because they hurt deeply, but because they were so petty and unnecessary. Victoria, however, wasn't done. Her earlier comments had only scratched the surface of what she clearly intended to be a full-blown verbal assault. Leaning back in her seat with an exaggerated sigh, she adjusted her designer sunglasses and turned toward her two assistants, who stood nearby like obedient statues. "Honestly," she said loudly enough for everyone within earshot to hear, I don't understand why celebrities think they deserve special treatment everywhere they go. It's exhausting. Her tone dripped with mockery, each word carefully chosen to provoke a reaction. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at one another as if silently asking, "Is anyone going to say something?" But most remained silent, unwilling, or perhaps too intimidated to intervene. After all, Victoria exuded power and wealth, qualities that often silenced dissent before it even began. Gabrielle, however, refused to give her the satisfaction of a response. Instead, she focused on maintaining her composure, taking slow, steady breaths to calm the knot forming in her stomach. She reminded herself that this wasn't the first time someone had tried to belittle her in public, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Still, there was something uniquely grating about Victoria's arrogance. It wasn't just the insults themselves. It was the sheer audacity with which she delivered them, as though she believed her money gave her license to trample over others. Noticing Gabrielle's silence, Victoria leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on her knees. A smug smile played at the corners of her lips. "You know," she continued, raising her voice ever so slightly, "if I were you, I'd probably stick to coach class. At least then people might take me seriously instead of assuming I'm just some charity case." This remark drew audible gasps from several passengers. Even those who hadn't been paying attention earlier now turned their heads, unable to ignore the escalating tension. One elderly man sitting near Gabrielle shook his head disapprovingly, muttering under his breath, "About rudeness these days." A young woman across the aisle shot Victoria a glare before quickly looking away, afraid of being targeted next. Gabrielle finally looked up from her tablet, her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, it seemed as though she might respond, but then she simply closed the device and placed it gently on the tray table in front of her. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if signaling that she wouldn't let Victoria's behavior disrupt her peace any further. Big Shaq, who had been watching the exchange unfold with growing irritation, felt his patience wearing thin. He had always hated bullies, whether on the basketball court or in everyday life, and Victoria's actions struck him as nothing short of bullying. What made it worse was the fact that she seemed to relish the attention, feeding off the discomfort of those around her. It was nauseating. He glanced at Gabrielle, noting the subtle flicker of unease in her eyes despite her outward calm. She was handling the situation admirably, but Big Shaq could tell it was taking its toll. No one should have to endure such blatant disrespect, especially not in a setting meant to be relaxing and enjoyable. Something inside him snapped. He couldn't sit idly by while Victoria continued to tear into Gabrielle like a predator circling its prey. Before he could act, however, Victoria doubled down on her attack. With a theatrical flourish, she gestured toward Gabrielle's outfit. "And honestly, darling, is that really appropriate attire for first class? You look like you're heading to a yoga studio, not interstellar travel. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure it's very comfortable, but we do have standards here." Her comment elicited a few nervous chuckles from passengers seated closer to her, though it was clear they were laughing out of discomfort rather than genuine amusement. Others outright frowned, visibly upset by her cruelty. One flight attendant approached cautiously, offering Gabrielle a glass of water with an apologetic smile. Gabrielle accepted it graciously, nodding her thanks, though her hands trembled slightly as she brought the glass to her lips. Big Shaq clenched his fists beneath the armrests of his chair, his jaw tightening. He wanted nothing more than to stand up right then and there and put Victoria in her place. But he forced himself to wait, knowing that timing was everything. If he intervened too soon, he risked making things worse. So he bided his time, observing Victoria's every move, waiting for the perfect opening. Meanwhile, Gabrielle attempted to regain control of the situation in her own way. Setting the glass of water aside, she turned to face Victoria directly, her gaze steady and unflinching. "You seem to have strong opinions about how others should live their lives," she said evenly, her voice carrying just enough authority to command attention. "But I wonder, are you equally critical of yourself?" The question caught Victoria off guard. For a split second, her confident facade faltered, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. But she quickly recovered, waving a dismissive hand. "Oh, please, spare me the self-help nonsense. I'm simply stating facts." "No," Gabrielle countered softly, leaning forward slightly. "What you're doing is projecting your insecurities onto others. And trust me, it shows." A murmur rippled through the cabin as passengers processed Gabrielle's words. Some nodded approvingly, impressed by her poise and insight. Others exchanged wide-eyed glances, unsure whether to applaud or shrink back into their seats. Victoria, meanwhile, bristled visibly, her cheeks flushing red. Clearly, she hadn't expected Gabrielle to fight back, at least not so eloquently. "You're awfully defensive for someone who claims to be above criticism," Victoria snapped, her voice rising an octave. "Maybe if you spent less time worrying about appearances and more time improving yourself, you'd actually earn your place here." Gabrielle opened her mouth to reply, but before she could speak, a deep, commanding voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Excuse me, miss, whatever your name is." All eyes turned to Big Shaq, who had risen from his seat and now stood towering over the cabin. His presence alone commanded respect, but it was the look in his eyes, a mix of amusement and barely contained fury, that silenced the room entirely. He crossed his arms over his chest, his broad shoulders casting a literal shadow over Victoria. "I couldn't help but overhear your little speech," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "And let me tell you, it's quite impressive. Truly, you've managed to insult someone who's accomplished more in her lifetime than you'll ever dream of achieving, all while contributing absolutely nothing meaningful to society." Victoria blinked rapidly, clearly stunned by his sudden intervention. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, searching for a comeback but finding none. Passengers exchanged excited whispers, some stifling laughter behind their hands. Even the flight attendants struggled to maintain their professional demeanor, their lips twitching with suppressed smiles. Big Shaq didn't stop there. He took a step closer to Victoria, his towering frame forcing her to crane her neck upward to meet his gaze. "If class were measured by manners," he continued, his voice ringing out clearly, "you'd be stuck in cargo hold with the luggage. Not even the crew would want you around." The cabin erupted into applause, cheers, and whistles. Passengers clapped enthusiastically, their pent-up frustration finally released. Several people stood up to get a better view of the showdown, their faces glowing with admiration for Big Shaq. Even the elderly man who had muttered earlier joined in, pumping his fist in approval. Victoria, meanwhile, looked utterly mortified. Her perfectly styled hair suddenly seemed less glamorous, her expensive outfit less impressive. She sank back into her seat, her lips trembling as she realized she had lost complete control of the situation. Her assistants exchanged panicked looks, unsure whether to comfort her or flee altogether. Gabrielle watched the scene unfold with a mixture of relief and amusement. She hadn't asked for Big Shaq's help, but she was undeniably grateful for it. As the applause died down and passengers returned to their seats, she caught his eye and offered a small, grateful smile. Big Shaq winked in response, his earlier anger melting away into satisfaction. Though the immediate confrontation had ended, the ripple effects of Victoria's behavior and Big Shaq's stunning retort would linger long after the celestial Voyager reached its destination. For now, however, the first-class cabin buzzed with newfound energy, its occupants united by a shared sense of justice and camaraderie. And as Gabrielle settled back into her seat, she couldn't help but feel a renewed appreciation for humanity, even in the face of its flaws. The applause from the passengers was still echoing through the first-class cabin when Big Shaq turned his attention back to Victoria Langley. She sat frozen in her seat, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. Her assistants hovered uncertainly behind her, unsure whether to intervene or simply vanish into thin air. For a woman used to commanding respect, or at least fear, this sudden reversal of power dynamics left her visibly shaken. Big Shaq didn't give her time to recover. With his towering frame casting a long shadow over her seat, he leaned forward, slightly, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Let me make one thing crystal clear," he said, his words cutting through the lingering cheers like a blade. No amount of money can buy class if you're missing basic decency. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Her usual arsenal of snide remarks and cutting insults failed her now, leaving her exposed in front of everyone. The confidence she had worn so proudly just moments ago crumbled under the weight of collective disapproval. Passengers who had once avoided eye contact with her now stared openly, their expressions ranging from amusement to outright disdain. Gabrielle. Union watched the scene unfold with quiet satisfaction. While she hadn't sought Big Shaq's intervention, she couldn't deny how much it meant to have someone stand up for her, not just as an individual, but as a symbol of resistance against petty cruelty. When Big Shaq glanced briefly in her direction, she gave him a subtle nod of gratitude. He responded with a wink, his earlier tension replaced by a mischievous grin, but Big Shaq wasn't done yet. Turning his gaze toward the other passengers, he raised his hand slightly, gesturing for their attention without needing to shout. The cabin fell silent almost instantly, every eye fixed on him. It was clear that this moment belonged to him now, and he intended to make the most of it. "Now let's talk about something important," Big Shaq began, his tone shifting from confrontational to reflective. "We're all here because we've worked hard, earned our place, or been lucky enough to afford this trip. But none of us are perfect. We all have flaws, insecurities, and bad days. That doesn't mean we get to take them out on others." His words struck a chord with many in the room. Some nodded slowly, while others exchanged thoughtful glances. Even the flight attendants paused in their duties, listening intently. Big Shaq's charisma wasn't just about humor and quick wit. It was about connecting with people on a deeper level, reminding them of shared humanity even in the most artificial environments. He pointed a finger directly at Victoria, though his expression softened slightly. "You, ma'am, might think your wealth makes you untouchable, but trust me, it doesn't. Money can buy comfort, convenience, maybe even silence sometimes. But it can't buy respect. Respect has to be earned, and frankly, you're not doing yourself any favors right now." Victoria sank further into her seat, her designer handbag clutched tightly against her chest as if it could shield her from the truth of his words. Her assistants exchanged nervous looks, clearly debating whether they should step in or simply disappear altogether. One of them whispered something inaudible to the other, eliciting a barely perceptible shake of the head. Big Shaq straightened up, addressing the entire cabin once more. "And to everyone else," he continued, his voice warm and encouraging. "Let's remember why we're here. This ship is taking us somewhere amazing, a whole new world waiting to be explored. Instead of tearing each other down, why don't we focus on lifting each other up? Kindness costs nothing, but its impact lasts forever." The passengers erupted into applause again, this time louder and more heartfelt than before. Several people stood up to cheer, their faces glowing with admiration for Big Shaq. A few even whistled, adding to the celebratory atmosphere. Gabrielle smiled softly, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't just about vindication, it was about witnessing a powerful reminder of what truly mattered. Victoria, however, was far from ready to accept defeat. As the applause died down, she forced herself to sit upright, attempting to regain some semblance of composure. Her lips pressed into a thin line and her knuckles whitened as she gripped her handbag tighter. "Fine," she spat, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "If this is how you want to play it, then go ahead. Enjoy your little victory lap." Her attempt at defiance fell flat. No one paid her any mind. Instead, the focus remained firmly on Big Shaq and Gabrielle. Several passengers approached Gabrielle to express their support, offering kind words and reassurance. One older gentleman patted her shoulder gently, saying, "Don't let her get to you, miss. People like that always reveal their true colors, eventually." Gabrielle thanked him warmly, touched by the gesture. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "It means a lot to hear that." As the commotion settled, Big Shaq returned to his seat, though not without stopping briefly to exchange a few words with Gabrielle. "You handled yourself beautifully," he told her, his deep voice filled with genuine admiration. "I just wanted to make sure she knew where the line was. I appreciate it more than you know." Gabrielle replied, her smile lighting up her face. Honestly, I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep my cool. Big Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. Trust me, I've dealt with plenty of people like her. They thrive on making others feel small, but only because they're insecure themselves. Once you call them out, they crumble faster than a cookie in zero gravity. Gabrielle laughed softly, grateful for his humor. Well, I'm glad you were here to step in. You saved me from having to say something I'd regret later. Anytime, Big Shaq said with a wink before retreating to his seat. As he settled back in, he couldn't help but glance at Victoria, who was now slumped in her chair, staring blankly at the floor. There was no triumph in seeing her humiliated. It wasn't about revenge or gloating. It was about setting boundaries and showing solidarity with those who deserved better. Meanwhile, Victoria's humiliation continued to unfold in small, humiliating ways. Other passengers began treating her with thinly veiled mockery, pretending to offer her assistance or luxuries they knew she wouldn't accept. One woman handed her a complimentary snack pack with exaggerated politeness, saying, "Here, madam. Surely someone of your stature deserves only the finest." Another man offered her a magazine, holding it out with 2 fingers as though it were contaminated. Each interaction chipped away at Victoria's already fragile ego, leaving her increasingly isolated. Her assistant seemed reluctant to engage with her, exchanging furtive glances whenever she issued a command. Even the flight crew treated her with polite indifference, ensuring her needs were met but never going above and beyond as they did for other passengers. Gabrielle noticed all of this, but chose not to dwell on it. Instead, she focused on enjoying the rest of her journey, buoyed by the unexpected camaraderie that had blossomed among the passengers. Conversations flowed freely now, breaking down barriers that had previously kept people apart. Strangers introduced themselves, sharing stories of their lives and reasons for traveling to Mars. Laughter echoed through the cabin, replacing the earlier tension with a sense of unity. For Gabrielle, this shift was particularly meaningful. She had always believed in the power of kindness and empathy, but seeing it play out in such a tangible way reinforced her faith in humanity. As the celestial Voyager hurtled through space, carrying its diverse group of travelers closer to their destination, it also carried them closer to understanding one another, and perhaps themselves. By the time the ship entered Mars orbit, hours later the mood in the cabin had transformed entirely. What had started as a tense and divisive journey had become a testament to resilience, compassion, and the strength found in standing together. And while Victoria Langley remained an unwelcome presence, her influence had faded into insignificance compared to the bonds forged during that unforgettable flight. As the celestial Voyager neared its destination, the atmosphere in the first-class cabin had shifted dramatically. The earlier tension and hostility had dissolved into a sense of camaraderie among the passengers, thanks largely to Big Shaq's intervention. Gabrielle Union found herself at the center of this newfound warmth, not because she sought attention, but because others were drawn to her quiet grace under pressure. Passengers who had once hesitated to approach her now greeted her with smiles and nods, their admiration evident. Victoria Langley, on the other hand, remained an island of isolation. Her attempts to regain control of the situation had failed, miserably, leaving her visibly deflated. She sat stiffly in her seat, clutching her designer handbag like a lifeline, her gaze fixed on the floor. Occasionally, she would glance up, only to find that no one was paying her any mind. Her assistants hovered nearby, exchanging worried looks but offering little support beyond perfunctory gestures. It was clear that Victoria's reign of intimidation had come to an abrupt end. Gabrielle noticed the change in dynamics but chose not to gloat or dwell on Victoria's downfall. Instead, she focused on fostering positivity within the group. As the ship prepared for landing, she stood up from her seat and addressed the cabin softly. "I just want to say thank you. To all of you," she began, her voice warm and sincere. "Today reminded me how important it is to stand together, especially when someone tries to divide us." Her words elicited murmurs of agreement from the passengers. Some nodded appreciatively, while others offered words of encouragement. One young woman, a scientist traveling to Mars for a research project, spoke up saying, You handled everything so gracefully. Honestly, I think we all learned something today. Gabrielle smiled, touched by the sentiment. We all played a part in turning things around, she replied, glancing briefly at Big Shaq. And I'm grateful for that. Big Shaq, seated nearby, raised his glass of sparkling water in a mock toast. To kindness winning over cruelty every time, he said with a grin, earning laughter and applause from the crowd. His ability to lighten the mood never ceased to amaze, and Gabrielle couldn't help but chuckle along with everyone else. But Gabrielle wasn't done yet. Turning her attention back to Victoria, she took a deep breath and approached the woman, cautiously. For a moment she considered whether this was the right move. After all, Victoria had gone out of her way to embarrass her publicly, and there was no obligation to extend an olive branch. Yet, Gabrielle believed in giving people a chance, even those who didn't seem to deserve it. Victoria, she said, gently, standing beside the woman's seat. Can we talk for a moment? Victoria looked up, startled by the unexpected gesture. Her expression was guarded, as if bracing herself for another confrontation. But Gabrielle's tone was calm and non-confrontational, putting her slightly at ease. Reluctantly, Victoria nodded, gesturing for her to sit in the empty seat next to her. Once seated, Gabrielle folded her hands neatly in her lap and met Victoria's gaze directly. I know what happened earlier was difficult, she began, choosing her words carefully. And I imagine it wasn't easy for you either, given how things unfolded. Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the lack of accusation in Gabrielle's voice. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again, unsure of what to say. Finally, she settled on a defensive reply. Look, I don't need a lecture from you. If you're here to rub salt in the wound, save your breath. Gabrielle shook her head, her expression softening further. That's not why I'm here, she assured her. I came because I believe everyone deserves a chance to reflect and maybe even grow from their mistakes. What you did earlier hurt, yes. But instead of holding on to anger, I'd rather see this as an opportunity for both of us to move forward. Victoria stared at her, clearly conflicted. On one hand, she wanted to dismiss Gabrielle's words as insincere or patronizing. On the other hand, there was something undeniably genuine about the actress's demeanor, something that made it hard to cling to her usual arrogance. I'm not perfect, Gabrielle continued, her voice steady. None of us are. But I've learned that success isn't just about money or fame. It's about how we treat others. And honestly, you have the potential to be better than this. All it takes is a choice. For the first time since boarding the ship, Victoria seemed genuinely unsure of herself. Her shoulders sagged slightly, and her grip on her handbag loosened. After a long pause, she muttered, almost too quietly to hear, Maybe you're right. Gabrielle smiled faintly, recognizing the small victory for what it was. It's okay to admit when we're wrong, she said kindly. The real test is what we do next. Before Victoria could respond, the intercom crackled to life, interrupting the moment. The captain's voice filled the cabin, announcing their imminent arrival on Mars. Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin our descent shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened and prepare for landing. Welcome to Mars. Passengers began bustling around, gathering their belongings and adjusting their seats. Gabrielle stood up, offering Victoria a final smile before returning to her own seat. Though their conversation had been brief, she hoped it might plant a seed of change in the woman's mind. Meanwhile, Big Shaq joined Gabrielle, leaning casually against the armrest of her chair. So, he said with a teasing grin, did you just try to redeem humanity single-handedly? Gabrielle laughed softly, shaking her head. Hardly. I just thought she deserved a chance to hear a different perspective. Whether she takes it or not is up to her. That's called being the bigger person, Big Shaq said approvingly. And trust me, it doesn't go unnoticed. As the ship descended through Mars's thin atmosphere, the view outside the windows transformed from infinite blackness to a breathtaking panorama of red sands and rocky terrain. Passengers pressed their faces against the glass, marveling at the alien landscape below. Gabrielle watched silently, feeling a mix of awe and gratitude. This journey had been far more eventful than she'd anticipated, but it had also reinforced her belief in the power of empathy and resilience. When the celestial Voyager finally touched down on the Martian surface, the passengers erupted into cheers and applause. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the cabin, ensuring everyone disembarked safely. As Gabrielle gathered her belongings, she noticed Victoria lingering near the exit, her expression unreadable. Their eyes met briefly, and though Victoria didn't say anything, Gabrielle detected a flicker of acknowledgement. A silent thank you, perhaps. Outside the ship, the air was crisp and cool, filtered through advanced environmental systems designed to make Mars habitable for visitors. Awaiting them were sleek transport pods that would ferry the passengers to their respective destinations across the planet. Gabrielle paused for a moment, taking in the surreal sight of humanity's foothold on another world. It felt like stepping into the future, a future shaped not just by technology but by the choices people made along the way. Big Shaq joined her, his towering frame casting a shadow over the crimson soil. "What's next for you?" he asked, curiously. "Some fancy award ceremony, right?" Gabrielle nodded, smiling. "Yes, though after today I feel like my priorities have shifted a bit. Maybe I'll use this platform to focus more on humanitarian work, or collaborate with inspiring individuals like yourself." Big Shaq chuckled, clearly pleased by the compliment. "Well, count me in. Together, we might actually make a difference." Their shared laughter drew the attention of nearby passengers, many of whom waved goodbye or expressed hopes of crossing paths again. Even Victoria, now several steps ahead, glanced back briefly before climbing into a transport pod. Her expression was harder to read than ever, but there was a hint of something new, perhaps regret, perhaps determination. As Gabrielle stepped into her assigned pod, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the initial confrontation with Victoria to Big Shaq's timely intervention, every moment had taught her something valuable. Humanity was flawed, yes, but it was also capable of incredible growth and connection. And as the pod sped away, toward the heart of Mars, Gabrielle felt hopeful, not just for herself but for the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The transport pods glided smoothly across the Martian surface, their sleek designs cutting through the thin atmosphere with ease. The crimson sands stretched endlessly in every direction, punctuated by jagged cliffs and towering rock formations that looked almost otherworldly under the pale sunlight. Despite its barren appearance, Mars held a strange allure, a promise of new beginnings and untapped potential. For Gabrielle Union, stepping onto this alien terrain felt like crossing into uncharted territory, not just physically but emotionally as well. As her pod pulled up to the designated arrival hub, a sprawling complex designed to welcome visitors from Earth, Gabrielle took a moment to collect her thoughts. She had come to Mars for an award ceremony celebrating her contributions to cinema and entertainment, but the events aboard the celestial Voyager had reshaped her perspective entirely. What started as a routine journey had turned into something far more profound. A lesson in resilience, empathy, and the enduring power of human connection. Big Shaq exited his pod shortly after hers, his towering frame drawing curious stares from bystanders who recognized him immediately. He grinned broadly, waving at a group of excited fans gathered nearby. "Looks like fame follows you everywhere," Gabrielle teased as he approached her. "Tell me about it," Big Shaq replied with a laugh, slinging his bag over one shoulder. "But hey, if I can use it to spread some positivity, why not? Speaking of which," he glanced toward Victoria Langley, who was climbing out of her own pod several meters away. Her assistants trailed behind her, carrying her luggage while she walked briskly, clearly eager to put distance between herself and the rest of the passengers. Gabrielle followed his gaze, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think she'll change?" she asked quietly. Big Shaq shrugged, his tone pragmatic yet hopeful. "People don't change overnight, but they do when they're ready. Today might have planted a seed. Whether or not she waters it is up to her." Gabrielle nodded, accepting his wisdom. She knew better than to expect immediate transformation. True growth took time effort, and self-awareness. Still, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope for Victoria. After all, everyone deserved a chance to learn from their mistakes, even those who seemed beyond redemption. Inside the arrival hub, chaos reigned as passengers scrambled to retrieve their belongings and navigate the bustling corridors leading to customs checkpoints. Holographic signs projected directions in multiple languages, guiding travelers to their respective destinations. Robots equipped with advanced AI systems zipped around, offering assistance and answering questions with mechanical precision. It was a marvel of modern engineering, a testament to humanity's ingenuity. But it also highlighted the stark contrast between technological advancement and social progress. Gabrielle moved through the crowd with quiet confidence, occasionally pausing to thank flight attendants and ground staff for their service. She carried herself with the same poise she always did, but there was a subtle shift in her demeanor, a newfound sense of purpose that radiated from within. Passengers who recognized her stopped to congratulate her on handling the situation. Aboard the ship so gracefully, their admiration evident in their words and gestures. "You really showed us what kindness looks like," one man said earnestly, shaking her hand. "We need more people like you in the world." Gabrielle smiled warmly, touched by the sentiment. "Thank you," she replied sincerely. "But remember, we all have the power to make a difference. Every act of kindness matters." Her words resonated deeply with those around her, sparking conversations about compassion, empathy, and the importance of treating others with respect. Even strangers bonded over shared experiences from the flight, exchanging contact information and promising to stay in touch. The ripple effect of Big Shaq's intervention, and Gabrielle's subsequent grace, was undeniable. Meanwhile, Victoria Langley navigated the hub with visible unease. Gone was the haughty confidence she had displayed earlier. Instead, she moved quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone who dared look her way. Her assistants struggled to keep pace with her hurried strides, their faces etched with exhaustion. When a customs officer politely requested her passport, Victoria snapped at him irritably, earning disapproving glares from nearby passengers. Despite her attempts to isolate herself, whispers of her behavior aboard the ship followed her wherever she went. People whispered behind cupped hands, recounting how Big Shaq had called her out and how Gabrielle had responded with dignity and grace. Some even chuckled openly, recounting her humiliation in vivid detail. Victoria clenched her fists tightly, her jaw tightening with each passing comment. Yet amidst the ridicule, there were moments of unexpected humanity. As she stood waiting for her luggage to arrive, a young boy tugged gently at her sleeve. Startled, Victoria looked down to see him holding out a small holographic toy, a miniature spaceship glowing faintly blue. "This is for you," the boy said shyly, his voice barely audible above the din of the hub. "I think you should have it." Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the gesture. For a moment, she seemed unsure of how to respond. Then, hesitantly, she accepted the toy, her lips parting slightly as if to say something, but no words came out. The boy beamed brightly before running back to his parents, leaving Victoria standing alone, clutching the tiny spaceship in her hand. It was a small act of kindness, seemingly insignificant compared to the grandeur of the day's events. But for Victoria, it felt monumental. The weight of her earlier actions pressed down on her once again, forcing her to confront the reality of her behavior. Tears welled up in her eyes, though she quickly wiped them away, embarrassed to show vulnerability in public. Later that evening, Gabrielle attended the award ceremony at a state-of-the-art theater, nestled within the heart of Mars' largest settlement. The venue was breathtaking, with walls made of translucent material that allowed glimpses of the Martian landscape outside. Stars twinkled faintly beyond the glass, creating an ethereal backdrop for the evening's festivities. As Gabrielle stepped onto the stage to accept her award, the audience erupted into applause. Cameras flashed, capturing her radiant smile as she addressed the crowd. "Tonight, I want to dedicate this honor to something bigger than myself," she began, her voice steady and heartfelt. "To kindness, to empathy, and to the belief that no matter where we come from or where we're headed, we are all connected. Her speech earned a standing ovation, with many attendees wiping tears from their eyes. Among them was Big Shaq, who cheered louder than anyone else, his booming voice echoing through the theater. Even Victoria, seated near the back, clapped softly, her expression unreadable but tinged with something resembling remorse. After the ceremony, guests mingled during a lavish reception held in a domed garden filled with oxygen-rich plants imported from Earth. Gabrielle found herself surrounded by admirers, each eager to share stories inspired by her actions aboard the ship. One woman recounted how she had stood up to a difficult colleague at work, drawing courage from Gabrielle's example. Another man described how he had resolved a long-standing feud with a neighbor, citing her message of unity as motivation. Tavern. Shaq joined her shortly afterward, raising a glass of sparkling water in a toast. To making ripples, he said with a grin, because sometimes those ripples turn into waves. Gabrielle laughed, clinking her glass against his. And here's to riding those waves together, she replied, her eyes shining with gratitude. The night wore on. Gabrielle spotted Victoria lingering near the edge of the room, sipping champagne quietly. Their eyes met briefly, and though neither spoke, there was a flicker of understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared, however tumultuous it may have been. When the event finally ended, Gabrielle returned to her quarters, overlooking the Martian horizon. She sat by the window, gazing out at the endless expanse of red sands stretching toward the horizon. The stars above shimmered faintly, reminding her of the vastness of the universe and the infinite possibilities it held. For Gabrielle, this trip to Mars wasn't just about receiving an award or navigating conflict. It was about rediscovering the values that truly mattered. Humanity's greatest achievements weren't measured by wealth or fame, but by the connections forged along the way, the acts of kindness, the moments of grace, and the unwavering belief in a better future. As she drifted off to sleep, Gabrielle felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she would face them with courage, compassion, and an unshakable faith in the goodness of humanity.